At 05:58 a.m., over a cold English airfield, slick with dew and nerves, the Merlin engine coughed like a waking animal. Frost clung to the P-51's canopy edges, breath steaming in the cramped cockpit where First Lieutenant Thomas Tuck Meredith flexed his gloved fingers and listened for truth in the engine's tone. And below him, one hangar light burned early. Too early, because Staff Sergeant Jack Halperin, 354th Fighter Group crew chief, was breaking rules again. A wrench clinked. A clipboard hid a maintenance logline nobody would ever officially sign, and one adjustment, one notch past regulation, pushed coolant flow into the red if anyone saw it. They never would, unless he killed a pilot. Fuel pressure steady. Coolant holding, Tuck radioed. Not for long, Jack thought. A B-17 limped overhead, trailing smoke from yesterday's mission. Jack exhaled, thumbed sweat from his temple and whispered, "If we don't cheat the limits, they die out there." The Merlin roared. Altitude would reveal its secret, and consequences would follow. Wind gnawed across the open dispersal areas at RAF Lashenden in Kent on January 6, 1944, rattling hangar, siding, and tugging at tarps covering aircraft. Jack Halperin moved fast because cold slowed everything. Tools, fingers, judgment, and war punished hesitation with documented efficiency. "Crew chief," a voice called across frozen concrete. Lieutenant Tuck jogged over, scarf tucked deep against wind, helmet half-strapped and bouncing against his chest. "She ready?" The P-51B Mustang behind them gleamed dull under clouded dawn, its Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin V1653 engine ticking with residual heat from pre-flight test runs. A red maintenance tag fluttered near its radiator scoop, regulations requiring supervisor sign-off before flight status. Jack didn't look him in the eye when he answered. "She'll climb like she owes you money." He didn't mention what he'd done the previous night, adjusting coolant bypass flow limits and radiator shutter stops to force more airflow through the belly scoop at altitude. Official maintenance bulletins, specifically Technical Order 0160JE2, warned against exceeding factory tolerances, risk of cavitation, overpressure, catastrophic system failure. But official answers weren't stopping German Bf 109G6s with MW50 methanol water boost systems at 30,000 feet, where regulation-compliant Mustangs choked on thin air and conservative cooling parameters. Jack's pencil hovered over the maintenance log. Form 1A required for squadron records. He penciled figures within approved limits in neat, false strokes that would pass any inspection. Nearby, ground crews cranked a Jeep-mounted auxiliary power unit to life, blue exhaust curling in cold air. Another squad pulled tarps from B-17s at the far end of the field, canvas snapping like rifle reports. Men coughed, spit into frozen grass, muttered morning curses, adjusted gloves against metal that burned, with cold. War was routine documented in sortie logs and fuel consumption reports. Death was calibration error recorded in accident investigation files. Jack snapped his toolkit shut, latches clicking with finality. "Bring her home, Lieutenant." Tuck nodded. Trust without complete knowledge, the way wars are fought. Engines spun up across the field, like teeth, grinding before a fight. Merlins and Allisons creating a wall of sound that made conversation impossible. And the first secret of the day took flight on a runway, slick with morning frost. Sunrise smeared thin gold across grey channel water as 32 Mustangs levelled out, climbing through 22,000 feet on January 6th. Silver wings knifed air in tight formation, escort duty for the 91st Bomb Group already assembling ahead, like migrating metal birds in documented V patterns. Tuck felt the familiar squeeze in his chest as cabin pressure dropped. Cold stabbed his cheeks, despite leather helmet and oxygen mask pressed tight against windburned skin. The Merlin's hum deepened, turbocharger whine rising in pitch as altitude increased and air thinned. "Red leader, temperature check," came Captain Jennings' calm voice over VHF radio. Squadron procedures requiring constant systems monitoring. Tuck glanced at instrument dials clustered before him. Coolant gauge, nominal at 105 degrees Celsius. Oil temperature, rising gradually but within safe parameters. Better than last month's climbs, when half the squadron reported overheating warnings above 25,000 feet. "Green and steady," he answered, keying throat microphone. "Except it shouldn't be stable. Not at this altitude climbing this fast. Not according to factory specifications and field experience accumulated over 18 months of European operations." He imagined Jack back at the field, wiping grease from weathered hands, pretending to obey rules that couldn't win wars against enemies willing to push mechanical limits beyond documented safety margins. Above the formation, contrails scratched white scars across blue. The Luftwaffe would come eventually. They always did over occupied France. Radio crackle broke the engine drone. Bomber stream in visual range. Titan escort spacing per briefing parameters. Below, in a freezing radio communications truck at Lashenden, Jack monitored return times, scribbled on a chalkboard in white chalk that smudged easily. Loss rates from previous weeks hung like ghosts in penciled tallies. 8 P-47 Thunderbolts lost to engine failure. 11 B-24 Liberators shot down or crippled. Cold kills slower than bullets, but just as permanently. Jack cracked his knuckles, a nervous habit from childhood, waiting for radio confirmation that his mechanical gamble held at operational altitude. A mechanic lives in the space between trust and terror, between regulation and innovation, between saving lives and ending them through miscalculation. And at altitude, truth always reveals itself in gauge needles and radio silence. Regulations hung like commandments from a bulletin board inside the maintenance tent later that morning. Technical Order 0160JE2, Engine Maintenance Limits and Procedures. Radiator System Warnings, printed in urgent capital letters. Unauthorized modification, prohibited underlined twice in red ink. Jack ignored them while sipping burned coffee from a dented tin mug, eyes fixed on the return status board, where aircraft tail numbers appeared as flights checked back in. Grease stained his right sleeve despite morning washing. His breath clouded inside the canvas tent, where a kerosene heater fought losing battle against January cold. A staff officer ducked through the tent flap, letting in wind that scattered paperwork. Halperin. Major Russell says Titan compliance procedures. Washington liaison wants tidy maintenance logs for inspection next month. Washington wasn't the organization scraping frozen coolant residue from broken radiator housings every morning. Washington wasn't the command that saw pilots carried from cockpits on stretchers, blue-lipped from hypoxia, helmets dented from emergency crash landings, because cooling systems failed at 28,000 feet and engines seized before pilots could descend to breathable atmosphere. "Copy that, sir," Jack muttered without looking away from the board. The officer left. Jack stared after him, jaw muscles clenched tight enough to ache, hands wrapped around the mug for warmth that couldn't reach deeper cold. Outside the tent, a Mustang screamed overhead on final approach. Flight lead, returning early from mission. No, just a local test run from maintenance checkout procedures. The sound still knotted Jack's stomach into familiar tension. He wiped the chalkboard with a rag, hand trembling slightly despite years of steady work. He'd risked court-martial proceedings and worse than administrative punishment. If a coolant line burst under unauthorized pressure, if a pilot seized an engine mid-climb during combat, they'd blame him by name in official reports. But if the modification worked within acceptable risk parameters, the bombers would survive deeper penetrations into German airspace. America's heavy wings would reach Berlin and return with crews intact, and intelligence photographs developed. He looked at the wall clock, hands pointing to 1100 hours. They'd be over northern France by now, altitude critical for intercept prevention. War measured time in engines running smooth or falling silent, and silence always came too soon, recorded in casualty reports. Bandits 11 o'clock high. The call knifed through radio static at 27,000 feet above northern France on January 6th. Afternoon mission over occupied territory. Contrails twisted in cold stratosphere. Mustang canopies flashed reflected sunlight as formation shifted according to doctrine. Fighters peeling away from bomber escort pattern into defensive positions. Tuck felt his gut pull tight against lap belt. He spotted them through plexiglass, Messerschmitt 109s diving from altitude advantage, yellow engine cowlings and black Balkenkreuz crosses slicing through blue sky toward vulnerable bomber formation. "Red flight, break right," Jennings barked command over radio frequency. Wings snapped into sharp bank. Gravity dragged Tuck sideways in his seat as he rolled hard, throttle pushed to maximum emergency power. Merlin engine screaming at redline RPM limits. His coolant gauge fluttered toward yellow warning zone. Normal response to combat climbing maneuvers, expected to spike into red danger zone within 30 seconds at this altitude and power setting. Except the needle didn't spike into failure range. It held steady at 112 degrees Celsius. Jack's illegal modification, tighter shutter tolerance allowing increased airflow, bypass valve adjustment, altered pressure relief threshold, kept cooling system pushing hard instead of bleeding off efficiency like factory standard settings demanded for longevity over performance. "Two bandits on your tail, Red 2, Jennings barked, warning over increasingly chaotic radio traffic. Tuck kicked rudder pedal, aircraft skidding sideways as tracer lines whipped past his canopy like illuminated chalk streaks. The Mustang's laminar flow wings shuddered under aerodynamic stress, but held energy through the maneuver exactly as wind tunnel tests predicted. A 109 overshot his position, pilot misjudging American turn radius. Tuck rolled inverted, pulled through, fired a 3-second burst from all 6 Browning M2 machine guns. Metal flashed. Enemy wingtips sheared away in tumbling fragments. The German fighter spiraled toward Earth, trailing white vapor, glycol coolant streaming from punctured radiator. Ironic symmetry not lost on Tuck. Breath fogged inside oxygen mask. Heart hammered against ribs. Coolant temperature held at 110 degrees Celsius, near maximum approved operating limit, but stable and controllable. B-17 formation undisturbed. Came Bomber Command's calm, professional tone over coordination frequency. Escort doing its primary mission job successfully. Luftwaffe interceptors driven off before reaching heavy bombers. Tuck returned to assigned formation position, adrenaline still spiking through bloodstream, fingers numb despite heated gloves. He felt invincible in this moment, and terrified of tomorrow's potential consequences. Today, cooling systems held under combat stress. Tomorrow, engineering inspectors would ask uncomfortable questions about performance exceeding documented specifications. War awards demonstrated courage in official citations. Bureaucracy punishes deviation from approved procedures regardless of outcomes. Altitude hid operational truth. during missions. Landing brought inevitable judgment and documentation review. Engines rumbled in staggered return waves throughout the afternoon. Ground. Crew personnel ran between dispersal areas. Wheel chocks slammed into position. Ground handlers waved colored signal paddles, directing taxiing aircraft. Jack watched every returning bird, scanning radiator housing shadows for glycol leaks, steam venting, any visible indication of system stress or failure. Tuck's P-51 rolled in last from the mission, canopy already open. Smooth landing, pilot alive and functional. Jack exhaled slowly. Relief tasted metallic like blood from bitten cheek. Tension releasing from shoulders that had been rigid for 3 hours. Tuck climbed down portable ladder, tore his leather helmet off, dark hair dripping sweat despite outside temperature, barely above freezing. Jack, she held together, climbed like a bat escaping hell itself. Jack forced a casual shrug, hands buried in jacket pockets. Just doing my assigned job, Lieutenant. Tuck grabbed his arm, grip firm through jacket's sleeve. No, performance was better than standard, significantly better. A clipboard slammed onto a nearby workbench. Major Russell, maintenance officer for the group, approached across concrete hardstand with purposeful stride. "We'll need your maintenance logs for review," Russell said flatly, eyes moving between mechanic and pilot. "Wing command review incoming within 48 hours. Jack's stomach hollowed despite the coffee and breakfast consumed 6 hours earlier. "All entries within approved limits, sir." "Then you won't mind detailed inspection of aircraft systems." Jack didn't blink or break eye contact. "Sir, if we stay inside factory performance limits, we lose pilots to superior enemy altitude capability. Luftwaffe fighters are running MW-50 methanol water boost systems. They overshoot our standard climb rates above 26,000 feet when American coolant management chokes efficiency." The Major's expression sharpened. Calculated risk assessment visible in weathered eyes. "We achieve victory by following established rules and procedures. We achieve victory by bringing pilots home alive to fly again tomorrow." Silence stretched between them. Nearby engines crackled with cooling metal contractions. Refueling crews shouted fuel quantities and octane ratings. A ground crew corporal swore creatively as frostbit exposed fingers during panel fastening. Russell walked off without immediate response or threat of disciplinary action. Tuck leaned close, voice low. "If this situation blows up into formal charges, I'll vouch for you in testimony." Jack smirked without warmth or humor. "Dead pilots don't sign character reference letters for court-martials." War wasn't only courage demonstrated in aerial combat. It was judgment exercised under administrative pressure, decisions made in grey areas between regulation and necessity. And Jack had just stepped deeper into that undefined grey territory where careers ended. Oil-burning heaters hummed inside the maintenance bay past midnight on January 7th. Metal tools clinked against concrete and aluminum. Exhausted men muttered through fatigue like monks reciting familiar prayers. Jack crawled under Tuck's aircraft on a wheeled creeper board, flashlight beam cutting harsh white across radiator housing assembly. His unauthorized adjustment sat hidden under legitimate standard fittings. Clever angles of installation, components shadowed by structural members. No official technical manual would show this specific configuration. He wiped frozen condensation from the belly scoop intake, bare fingers registering cold that made them ache. P-51 cooling system design was mechanical genius, Meredith effect principles. Heated airflow exiting from radiator exchanger created net positive jet thrust benefit, offsetting cooling drag penalty. but the factory-approved tolerances sacrificed peak altitude performance capability to avoid increased maintenance workload and potential warranty complications. Jack didn't care about maintenance schedules or warranty concerns tracked by accountants. He cared about bomber crews reaching Berlin and returning with reconnaissance photographs that shortened the war. A corporal rolled past with a parts cart, wheels squeaking. Halperin, heard command brass breathing down your neck about procedures. Regulations don't kill Nazi fighters, Jack muttered while checking torque on a fitting. They sure kill American military careers efficiently, though. Footsteps echoed on concrete. Major Russell returned, cold anger replaced by something closer to weary pragmatism in his expression. You deliberately altered factory specifications. Jack didn't waste energy on denial. I optimized field performance tolerances for combat operational requirements. That's direct violation of technical order directives. That's operational survival against documented enemy capabilities. Russell stared down at the mechanic under the aircraft, then spoke with surprising softness. If a pilot dies because of your modification, responsibility lands entirely on you. Jack nodded slowly. Truth spoken plainly. Truth accepted fully. Russell walked away without filing formal violation report. For now, at least. Temporary reprieve, not exoneration. Jack sat back on the cold concrete floor, heart pounding against ribs, hands shaking slightly from tension rather than cold or fatigue. He understood the stakes completely. One catastrophic failure, and he'd face court-martial proceedings with potential dishonorable discharge. Worse than career destruction, he'd become the documented reason a man didn't return home to family waiting in American cities and farms. He touched the aluminum fuselage skin with one palm, whispering like a chaplain at confession booth, "Hold together. Hold them all safe." War was fought publicly by pilots in official reports and gun camera footage, but won or lost privately by hands like his, in midnight hangars where regulations met reality and choices had to be made without guidance from headquarters staff. Briefing boards glowed harsh white under electric lights on January 11th, 1944. Preliminary missions before the major Big Week offensive raids against German industrial targets. Commanders spoke over wall maps marked with coloured pins. Oschersleben, Halberstadt, Brunswick, the industrial heart of the Third Reich's aircraft production capacity. Pilots scribbled navigation notes on kneeboards. Jack stood at the back of the briefing room, unofficial presence but listening carefully to operational parameters. The target list meant deep penetration into defended airspace, extended loiter time over enemy territory, high altitude escort requirements, absolute cooling system stress under worst possible conditions. Captain Jennings tapped his pencil against the map border. Luftwaffe will commit their best remaining units. Expect 109 G6 variants, FW-190A8 fighters, high altitude interception, head-on passing attacks against bomber formations. A murmur rippled through assembled pilots. Head-on attacks killed more bomber crew members than flak patterns according to loss analysis statistics. Jack watched Tuck across the room. His jaw flexed unconsciously. He wasn't fearless. He was human and knew probability statistics like everyone else who'd survived more than 10 missions. After briefing dismissal, Tuck cornered Jack near the door. "If you have any doubts about system reliability, tell me now, honestly." Jack met his eyes directly. "Engine will outclimb any other Mustang in the entire wing group. System won't fail you under normal combat stress parameters." Tuck nodded slowly. Trust between men had measurable weight. A flight operations officer rolled a chalkboard listing critical numbers. Internal fuel, 184 gallons. Drop tanks, 2 75-gallon external, radiator control, automatic primary, manual override backup capability. Jack's heart tightened, reading manual backup. If automatic shutters jammed stuck, engines would cook themselves to seizure within minutes. He methodically checked tools in his kit. Thermal paste compound, ratchet stops, spare rubber seals, fingers moving steady through routine preparation. Fear channeled productively into preparation ritual that gave illusion of control. Outside the briefing building, wind carried distant bomber engine droning from another airfield 10 miles away. War never slept completely. It only paused briefly to reload ordnance and refuel aircraft between missions. Tonight, pilots would dream fitfully of home addresses and familiar faces. Jack would dream of instrument gauges holding steady under impossible conditions, needles remaining in safe green zones despite physics and probability. And somewhere in Germany, Luftwaffe mechanics prayed simultaneously for the exact opposite outcomes. The bomber formations created a steel horizon at noon over occupied Europe, vapor trails webbing the sky in geometric patterns that extended for miles. P-51 Mustangs danced protective circles around them, wolves guarding a vulnerable herd of massive aircraft. Radio static popped sharply. Enemy fighters climbing, 2 o'clock position. Then, dark streaks across blue, black specks growing rapidly larger, sun glints reflecting from canopies. Jagdgeschwader 11 interceptors, committing to attack. Tuck rolled inverted, dove to build energy, climbed steeply to regain altitude advantage, checking temperature gauges every 5 seconds by training and superstition. Coolant temperature inching upward but remaining stable in yellow caution zone. He felt the aircraft alive and responsive under his hands, not fighting for breath in thin atmosphere. High altitude performance edge, exactly what engineering theory dreamed about and bureaucracy feared approving. Below the fighter engagement, a B-17 Flying Fortress took a direct cannon, burst through left wing, trailing thick black smoke. Crew members bailed out, small dark dots against endless blue, parachutes blooming white like dandelion seeds. Tuck growled frustration into oxygen mask. "Red flight, on me!" He dove aggressively onto a pair of FW-190s, slashing toward the bomber formation's vulnerable rear elements. 650 caliber machine guns thundered, recoil vibration traveling through airframe. One German fighter peeled away, trailing dark smoke. The second rolled violently and escaped into cloud cover. G-forces crushed Tuck's ribs, vision greying at periphery. "Coolant holding stable," he muttered like prayer or incantation. Behind scattered clouds, more fighters tangled in swirling combat. Tracer web patterns, aluminum skin confetti tumbling, radio transmissions cut short mid-word by violence. And one Mustang suddenly burst into white steam plume, radiator punctured by gunfire. Vapor trailed behind like arterial blood in water. Pilot bailed immediately, parachute opening violently and jerking the body like a rag doll. Jack's modification kept one aircraft alive through cooling demands. Fate and probability claimed another through different mechanism. War is balance maintained precariously, always temporary balance. Tuck's fuel gauge showed critically low level. Red led to base, escort fighters covering bomber egress now. He turned toward England, lungs aching from oxygen system pressure, fingers numb despite electric heating, guilt and relief mixing incompatibly like oil and water in his chest. One more mission survived and documented. Thousands more missions remaining to fly before war's end. Altitude advantage saved him today, and a mechanic's willingness to bend written rules. The hangar door slammed open that evening with dramatic force. 2 technical inspectors entered, clipboards held formally, faces carved from regulation stone and professional skepticism. "Random evaluation of maintenance procedures," one announced loudly. Jack's gut sank immediately. Nothing truly random about this timing immediately, after combat success above projected performance parameters. Tuck watched from the hangar sideline, cheeks still wind-burned red, body still vibrating slightly from hours of flight stress. Captain Jennings hovered nearby too, protective tension radiating from his posture. Inspectors circled Tuck's Mustang like wolves approaching a wounded animal. Handheld inspection lights probed every shadow of the radiator housing assembly. One inspector paused, eyes narrowing at the modified pressure relief spring angle that shouldn't exist according to depot maintenance specifications. Jack's pulse spiked sharply, sweat formed under wool scarf despite cold temperature. Hands felt ice cold inside pockets. This component is not factory-approved configuration per technical manual. Silence held tension like a burning fuse. Jack stepped forward deliberately. Field optimization developed from operational experience prevents critical plateau overheating conditions above 27,000 feet. Documented mission necessity based on enemy capability analysis. Inspector's pencil scratched paper. Authorization source? Combat performance requirements? That is not official authorization procedure. Then, measured footsteps. Colonel Harding, group commanding officer. Older man, eyes sharp despite exhaustion, face lined deeply by too many memorial services for dead aircrew. He studied the disputed part carefully, looked at Jack's face, then at Tuck's expression. "This aircraft brought men home today successfully?" "Yes, sir," Tuck said quietly, but clearly. Harding weighed competing principles, written law versus operational truth. Finally, field discretion approved retroactively under Combat Effectiveness Directive. File proper after-action engineering notation for record. The inspector stiffened visibly. "Sir, regulation specifically states..." "Regulation doesn't bury my pilots in foreign soil," Harding snapped with command finality. Inspectors retreated toward the door, grudging compliance despite professional disapproval. Jack exhaled shakily, adrenaline crash beginning. Tuck clapped his shoulder firmly. "You just saved the entire squadron again without firing weapons." Jack didn't smile. Too close to disaster. War isn't only fought in the sky with guns and bombs. Sometimes the most important battlefield is a clipboard and a colonel's judgment call. Alarm bell shattered early morning silence. Engines roared to immediate life. No time for coffee, controlled breathing, rational thought processes. Bomber formations diverted mid-mission. German counter-raid inbound toward the English coast. Emergency scramble alert. Tuck sprinted across hardstand, boots hammering metal boarding steps. Jack sprinted beside the aircraft too, checking last-minute panel fasteners while propeller already spun at idle power. Hydraulic oil splashed across his boots. He didn't flinch or slow down. "Temperature will spike early. I pushed tolerances tighter after..." "Yesterday," Jack warned over mechanical noise. "Then I'll fly her gentle until we absolutely need to be aggressive wolves." Canopy sealed with rubber gasket. Thump. Engine screamed to full takeoff power setting. Aircraft tore down runway surface, wheels lifting off before fear could catch rational thought. Clouds swallowed the climbing formation. Frost crystals swirled like white ash particles. At 18,000 feet, distinct contrails visible. German Ju-88 Pathfinder aircraft with FW-190 close escort fighters. Tuck breathed slowly and deliberately. "Let's intercept and cut them off from bombers." Formation climbed steeply. Radiator temperature needle climbed proportionally, 112 degrees Celsius. Jack's modification dancing precisely on performance edge. Coolant hissed audibly like it might flash to steam if pride or confidence wavered for one moment. A FW-1D90 fired head-on passing attack. Tuck rolled under the attack, pulled into vertical climb, engine groaning mechanically under extreme stress. He felt dangerous vibration, not from enemy damage, from his own cooling system. Manual shutter override, last resort option. He hit the emergency lever firmly. Radiator intake opened wider mechanically. Aerodynamic drag increasing significantly. Net thrust dropping measurably. Performance gamble temporarily lost its advantage. But engine temperature cooled rapidly. Barely, but adequately. He dove aggressively. Fired sustained burst. 50 caliber rounds shredding the 1D90's wing structure completely. German aircraft spiraled earthward, burning brightly. Oxygen rasped harsh through mask regulator. Blood pounded in temples. He'd lived initially by mechanics' calculated gamble, now survived additionally by manual override backup. Lesson crystal clear: innovation saves lives when it works. But risk always stalks closely behind innovation, waiting for the inevitable statistical failure. Runway surface blurred past canopy. Tuck set the aircraft down hard, brakes squealing metal against metal. Jack ran toward the parking spot as propeller wind blasted dust horizontally. Tuck popped canopy latch immediately, hands shaking noticeably. She nearly cooked completely. Manual override saved the engine. Jack nodded, throat tight with implications. I'll refine tolerance parameters more conservatively. You did nothing professionally wrong. Jack stared at the steaming radiator housing, metal still alive from thermal stress cycling. Wrong keeps men alive sometimes. Right keeps bureaucracy happy and careers safe. An ambulance rolled past urgently. Another pilot being pulled unconscious from cockpit, either hypoxia or complete engine loss. Jack tracked the stretcher with his eyes. His hands clenched involuntarily into fists. Tuck followed his gaze across the field. We're all gambling with probability every mission. Jack exhaled slowly. Only difference is, you see the sky and enemy. I see the mechanical odds and failure statistics. Sunset bled across the airfield like a wound closing slowly over landscape. Days shrinking towards spring. Lives shrinking faster than calendar time. War didn't offer clean victories documented in triumphant headlines. Only survival tallies recorded in morning briefing boards. Jack returned silently to his tool cabinet and waiting work. Tuck walked toward operations debriefing and required paperwork. And night fell heavily on men weighed down by choices no technical manual ever adequately covered or addressed. Forks scraped against dented tin meal trays 2 days later. Radio sets hissed weather forecast reports continuously. Nobody spoke loudly. Exhaustion pressed down like winter fog settling thick over fields. Jack sat alone at corner table, hands bandaged white from a coolant chemical burn during maintenance. Word had spread efficiently through the group. Unofficial engine modification, saving altitude combat capability. Some ground crew personnel nodded respect when passing. Some whispered, "Rule breaker," behind his back with moral judgment. Captain Jennings sat across from him deliberately. Wing Command is reviewing your methodology for potential formal testing and standardization. Jack blinked slowly. Victory finally? Or elaborate trap with career-ending consequences? Jennings continued. Voice kept low. Berlin offensive raids intensify next month. We need every performance advantage available against defended targets. Jack stirred coffee mechanically. Dark, bitter, real. If they approve the modification officially, I did my assigned job correctly. If they officially disapprove, "You still did your job correctly," Jennings finished firmly. Voices outside called weather delay announcement. Snow drifted soft white against tent canvas walls. Peace felt borrowed from an uncertain future. Jack remembered specific faces lost permanently. Engines that never returned from missions. His hands shook slightly, not from cold, but from accumulated stress and responsibility weight. Jennings rose from the table. History eventually favors the bold who take calculated risks. Jack didn't reply immediately. History also systematically forgets mechanics who make bold decisions possible. But surviving pilots never forgot the mechanics who kept them alive. Sun punched clear across horizon during spring 1944. Later missions over the same contested sky. Mustangs climbed again confidently. Newer P-51D variants now arriving with factory engineering notes explicitly referencing cooling system dynamics derived from field observations and combat data analysis. Jack's unauthorized tweak had become official policy, quietly documented but organizationally real. Engineering memoranda traced lineage back to 354th Fighter Group field reports submitted through proper channels. The war machine learning gradually from men in greasy coveralls and practical experience. Tuck sat in cockpit again, feeling clean, responsive power, stable temperature, management, not magic or luck, proper engineering applied. Hard-earned knowledge, written in risk and validation. Above the English Channel, contrails stretched seemingly endless. Radio communications remained calm and professional. This particular climb felt qualitatively different. Confidence replacing previous dread and constant gauge watching. Tuck whispered to himself, "She breathes easy now." Jack, monitoring ground communications headset, heard the transmission clearly. Pride moved through him quiet and warm as sunrise light. Bomber formations droned steadily behind fighter escort, relatively safe for this moment in endless war. A full squadron curved gracefully eastward, sleek silver predators in cold morning light. Somewhere over occupied France, German pilots scanned sky carefully, wondering when and how Allied forces found new technical edge in ongoing struggle. The answer existed, but wouldn't be documented publicly. A mechanic with a wrench and absolute refusal to settle for regulation, compliance when operational reality demanded more capability. No medal ceremony, no newspaper headline, but lives saved through technical insight. Critical missions won through maintenance innovation. Archival notation. 354th Fighter Group Combat Operations Diary, March 1944. Mustang fighters maintain effective cooling at operational altitude. Escort superiority achieved consistently. War eventually ended with terse bureaucratic documents exactly like that entry, written in permanent ink, paid for in sweat, risk, and judgment. Jack wiped his permanently stained hands clean, watched contrails climb toward combat altitude. Victory wasn't loud celebration. It hummed steady through coolant pipes and carefully adjusted systems, born in a cold hangar at dawn where one man chose calculated risk over safe regulation compliance, and somewhere above in cold stratosphere, a pilot breathed freer air because of that choice. Fade to archival silence. Merlin engine echo, lingering like heartbeat in open sky,